The LTV A-7 Corsair II was a carrier-capable subsonic light attack aircraft designed by Ling-Temco-Vought to replace the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. Its airframe design was a somewhat smaller version of the supersonic Vought F-8 Crusader. The Corsair II initially entered service with the United States Navy during the Vietnam War. It was later adopted by the United States Air Force, including the Air National Guard, to replace the Douglas A-1 Skyraider and North American F-100 Super Sabre. The aircraft was also exported to Greece in the 1970s and Portugal in the late 1980s. Design and development. In 1962, the United States Navy began preliminary work on VAX, a replacement for the A-4 Skyhawk with greater range and payload. Particular emphasis was placed on accurate delivery of weapons to reduce the cost per target. The requirements were finalized in 1963, announcing the VAL competition. To minimize costs, all proposals had to be based on existing designs. Vought, Douglas Aircraft, Grumman and North American Aviation responded. The Vought proposal was based on the successful Vought F-8 Crusader fighter, having a similar configuration, but shorter and more stubby, with a rounded nose. It was selected as the winner on the 11th of February 1964, and on the 19th of March the company received a contract for the initial batch of aircraft, designated A-7. In 1965, the aircraft received the popular name Corsair II, after Vaught's highly successful Vought F-4U Corsair of World War II. Compared to the F-8 fighter, the A-7 had a shorter, broader fuselage. The wing had a longer span, and the unique, variable incidence feature of the F-8 wing was omitted. To achieve the required range, the A-7 was powered by a Pratt & Whitney TF3OP6 turbofan producing 11,345 lb-f of thrust. The same innovative combat turbofan produced for the F-111 and early F-14 Tomcats, but without the afterburner needed for supersonic speeds. The aircraft was fitted with an APQ-116 radar, later followed by the APQ-126, which was integrated into the ILAAS digital navigation system. The radar also fed a digital weapons computer which made possible accurate delivery of bombs from a greater standoff distance, greatly improving survivability compared with faster platforms such as the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. It was the first U.S. aircraft to have a modern head-up display, now a standard instrument which displayed information such as dive angle, airspeed, altitude, drift and aiming reticle. The integrated navigation system allowed for another innovation, the projected map display system, which accurately showed aircraft position on two different map scales. The A-7 had a fast and smooth development. The YA-7A made its first flight on the 27th of September 1965, and began to enter Navy squadron service late in 1966. The first Navy A-7 squadrons reached operational status on 1 February 1967, and began combat operations over Vietnam in December of that year. The A-7 offered a plethora of cutting-edge avionics compared to contemporary aircraft. This included data link capabilities that, among other features, provided fully hands-off carrier landing capability when used in conjunction with its approach power compensator or auto-throttle. Other notable and highly advanced equipment was a projected map display located just below the radar scope. The map display display was slave to the inertial navigation system and provided a high-resolution map image of the aircraft's position superimposed over TPC-JNC charts. Moreover, when slave to the all-axis autopilot, the inertial navigation system could fly the aircraft hands-off to up to 9 individual waypoints. Typical inertial drift was minimal for newly manufactured models, and the inertial measurement system accepted flyover, radar, and TACAN updates. Operational history. Initial operational basing, home porting for U.S. Navy A-7 squadrons was at NAS Cecil Field, Florida for Atlantic Fleet units and NAS Lemoore, California for Pacific Fleet units. This was in keeping with the role of these bases in already hosting the A-4 Skyhawk attack squadrons that would eventually transition to the A-7. From 1967 to 1971, a total of 27 Navy squadrons took delivery of 4 different A-7 CE models. The Vought plant in Dallas, TX employed up to 35,000 workers who turned out 1 aircraft a day for several years to support the Navy carrier-based needs for Vietnam and Asia and commitments to NATO in Europe. In 1974, when the US Midway became the first forward-deployed naval force aircraft carrier to be home-ported in Yokosuka, Japan, 2 A-7B squadrons assigned to Carrier Air Wing 5 were concurrently home-ported at NAF Atsugi, Japan. In 1976, these squadrons finally transitioned to the much more advanced A-7E model. 6 Naval Reserve attack squadrons would also eventually transition to the A-7, operating from NAS Cecil Field, Florida, NAS Atlanta, Dobbins Arm, Georgia, NAS New Orleans, Louisiana, NAS Alameda, California, and NAS Point Mugu, California. An additional active duty squadron stood up in the 1980s, Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron 34 at NAS Point Mugu, which would operate twin-seat A-7C and A-7L aircraft with both a pilot and a naval flight officer in an adversary electronic warfare role. Pilots of the early A-7s lauded the aircraft for general ease of flying and excellent forward visibility, but noted a lack of engine thrust. This was addressed with A-7B and more thoroughly with A-7D. The turbofan engine provided a dramatic increase in fuel efficiency compared with earlier turbojets. The A-7D was said to have specific fuel consumption 1/6 that of an F-100 Super Sabre at equivalent thrust. An A-7D carrying 12 by 500 pounds bombs at 480 miles per hour at 33,000 feet used only 3,350 pounds of fuel per hour. Typical fuel consumption at mission retrograde during aircraft carrier recovery was approximately 30 pounds per minute compared to 100+ pounds per minute for the Phantom F4 Jet N series. The A-7 Corsair II was tagged with the nickname SLUF by pilots. Southeast Asia carrier use in Vietnam, the hot, humid air robbed even the upgraded A-7D and A-7E of power. Takeoff rolls were lengthy, and fully armed aircraft struggled to reach 500 miles per hour. For A-7A aircraft, high-density altitude and maximum weight runway takeoffs often necessitated a low transition, where the aircraft was intentionally held in ground effect a few feet off the runway during gear retraction, and as much as a 10-mile departure at treetop altitude before reaching a safe flap retraction speed. Carrier catapult launches at maximum weight under these performance-robbing conditions were not significantly better and were characterized by the aircraft decelerating by as much as 20 knots immediately after launch. launch. As a result, A-7 units operated their aircraft 4,000 pounds below the max-rated takeoff weight for the A-7E, in a sortie against the Than Hoa Bridge on 6 October 1972. 4 A-7Cs from VA-82 successfully delivered 8,000 pounds of high explosives with 2 planes carrying 2,000 pounds walleyes, while 2 others also carried 2,000 pounds in Mk-84 GP bombs. In a simultaneous attack, the center piling on the bridge's west side was hit and broke the span in half. After this, the Than Hoa Bridge was considered permanently destroyed and removed from the target list. A total of 98 US A-7 Corsairs were lost during the war. United States Air Force A-7D. The United States Army has not been permitted to operate fixed-wing combat aircraft since the establishment of an independent United States Air Force in 1947. To meet its need for close air support of its troops in South Vietnam, the Army pressured the Air Force to procure a specialized subsonic close air support fixed-wing aircraft that would suit its needs better than the general-purpose supersonic aircraft that the USAF preferred. The Vought A-7 seemed to be a relatively quick and inexpensive way to satisfy this need. However, the USAF was initially reluctant to take on yet another Navy-designed aircraft, but Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara was insistent. On 5 November 1965, Secretary of the Air Force Harold Brown and USAF Chief of Staff General John P. McConnell announced that they had decided to order a version of the Corsair II, designated A-7D, for the Tactical Air Command. The A-7D differed from the Navy's Corsair II in several ways. For one, the Air Force insisted on significantly more power for its Corsair II version, and they selected the Allison TF-41A1 turbofan engine, which was a license-built version of the Rolls-Royce Spey. It offered a thrust of 14,500 pounds, over 2,000 pounds greater than that of the TF-30 that powered the Navy's Corsair IIs. Other changes included a head-up display, a new avionics package, and an M61A1 rotary cannon in place of the 2 single-barrel 20mm cannon. Also included was a computerized navigation, weapons delivery system with an APQ-126 radar and a head-up display. 2 YA-7D prototypes were completed with TF-30P6 engines, and the first of these flew on 6 April 1968. The first Spey-powered A-7D flew for the first time on 26 September 1968. The 17th production aircraft introduced a provision for boom flight refueling in place of the Navy's probe stroke system, with the boom receptacle being on the top of the fuselage behind the cockpit and offset to port. The A-7D first entered service in 1970 with the 57th Fighter Weapons Wing at Luke AFB, Arizona, and the 354th Tactical Fighter Wing at Myrtle Beach AFB, South Carolina. Was equipped with 4 squadrons of A-7Ds by 1972, the 355th TFW at Davis Monthan AFB was equipped with 4 squadrons in 1972, and in 1973, the 23D TFW at England AFB, Louisiana was fully equipped with A-7Ds. The 354th TFW first deployed 2 squadrons of A-7Ds to Karat Royal Thai AFB, Thailand in September 1972 as part of Operation Cornet Dancer. The A-7Ds were quickly assigned the Sandy mission of providing air cover for combat search and rescue missions of downed pilots, taking over for Douglas A-1 Skyraiders. The A-7's higher speed was somewhat detrimental for escorting the helicopters, but the aircraft's high endurance and durability were an asset, and it performed admirably. On the 18th of November 1972, Major Colin A. Clark led successful CSAR mission near Than Hoa to rescue a downed F-105 Wild Weasel crew. The mission lasted a total of 8.8 hours, during which Clark and his wingman took a number of hits from 0.51 cal anti-aircraft fire. For his actions in coordinating the rescue, Clark was awarded the Air Force Cross, the USAF's second highest decoration for valor, and his A-7D was eventually placed on display on the 31st of January 1992 at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson, AFB, Ohio. With the end of U.S. involvement in South Vietnam, the 354th TFW at Karat began flying combat sorties in Cambodia to support the Lon Nol government in support of Khmer National Armed Forces against the Khmer Rouge. Rotational deployments began to Karat from the 355th TFW and 23D TFW, with pilots and support personnel beginning 6 months deployment cycles. In March 1973, the 354th transferred a squadron of A-7Ds to the 388th TFW, the host wing at Karat RTAFB at the time, which re-established the 3D Tactical Fighter Squadron and created a permanent USAF A-7D presence in Southeast Asia. A-7Ds from both wings stationed at Karat engaged in combat operations in Cambodia until the 15th of August 1973, when an A-7D of the deployed 353D TFS 354th TFW carried out the last air support mission. In March 1974, the 354th TFW transferred several more aircraft to the 3D TFS prior to its return to Myrtle Beach AFB. The USAF A-7D flew a total of 12,928 combat sorties during the war, with only 6 losses, the lowest of any U.S. fighter in the theater. The aircraft was second only to Boeing B-52 Stratofortress in the amount of ordnance dropped on Hanoi, and dropped more bombs per sortie with greater accuracy than any other U.S. attack aircraft. A-7E development. The Navy was sufficiently impressed with the increased power offered by the A-7D SPA engine used by the Air Force, and decided to use this engine for its own version of the Corsair II. The designation A-7E was assigned, and this version was to succeed the A-7B in production. However, there were delays in the deliveries of the TF-41A2 engine specified for the A-7E, so the first 67 aircraft of the order were delivered with the TF-30P5 engine. These aircraft had all of the other improvements planned for the A-7E, including the improved avionics and the M61 rotary cannon, and were redesignated A-7C after delivery. The first SPA-powered A-7E flew for the first time on the 9th of March 1969. The A-7E differed from the USAF A-7D in retaining the probe and drogue mid-air refueling system of the earlier A-7B. It entered service in Southeast Asia in May 1970 with VA-146 and VA-147 deployed aboard the US America. The A-7E participated in numerous close air support missions over both North and South Vietnam, the A-7E's state-of-the-art bombing and navigation system being particularly reliable and accurate. Most air wings operating Douglas A-4 Skyhawks and early A-7s were re-equipped with A-7s. The A-7E participated in the mining of Haiphong Harbor in 1972. and played a vital role in Operations Linebacker and Linebacker II that led up to the formal end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War on 24 January 1973. On the 15th of May 1975, A-7E aircraft operating from the US Coral Sea in conjunction with A-7D aircraft assigned to the 3D-TFS at Crusader-The AFB, provided air cover in what is considered the last battle of the Vietnam War, the recovery of the SS Mayaguez after it was hijacked by Khmer Rouge gunboats. By the time the Mayaguez incident was over, 3 USAF Sikorsky CH-53C Stallion helicopters had been shot down, 2 airmen, 11 Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen had been killed in action, and a further 3 Marines were missing in action. Post-Vietnam era, Air National Guard. With the pullout of the USAF from its Thailand bases in late 1975, the A-7Ds stationed at Korat initially went to Clark Ab, Philippines. The 3D-TFS transitioned from its Corsairs to the McDonnell Douglas F-4E Phantom II and remained at Clark. The A-7Ds were returned to the United States, where they were reassigned to several Air National Guard squadrons. With the end of the Vietnam War, the Air Force began to transfer its active-duty A-7D aircraft to Air National Guard units beginning in 1974. The Corsairs had been, in a sense, a forced acquisition by the Air Force in the late 1960s, and the inter-service rivalry of flying a Navy plane had led, beginning about 1970, to the development of its own close air support aircraft. In 1974, selection of the Republic Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II was made as the replacement of the A-7D. The first A-10s were received by the 354th TFW in 1977 at Myrtle Beach AFB, the 355th TFW at Davis Month, and AFB began replacing their A-7Ds in 1978, and the 23D TFW at England AFB in 1979. As the A-10s were received from Republic, the A-7Ds were transferred from the USAF to the National Guard Bureau for subsequent reallocation. By 1981, when the 23D TFW sent the last A-7Ds to Tonopah Test Range Airport, Nevada for clandestine use in the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk development program, 15 ANG squadrons were equipped with the A-7D Corsair II. However, congressional decisions added additional funding to the DoD FY 1975 and FY 1976 budgets for the procurement of additional A-7Ds, primarily to keep the LTV production line in Dallas open and the workers employed in the wake of post-Vietnam procurement reductions. As a result of these unplanned acquisitions, the Air Force assigned these new 1975 and 1976 built aircraft, along with new twin-seat A-7K trainers in 1979, directly to the Air National Guard. On 12 January 1981, in the 1981 Luis Munoz Marin International Airport attack, 10 A-7Ds of the 198th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Puerto Rico Air National Guard, were destroyed or damaged in a terrorist attack by the Boricua Popular Army at Munoz Air National Guard Base in the largest attack ever on an American military station since the Vietnam War. This terrorist attack was largely unreported due to the Iran hostage crisis at the time. During the post-Vietnam era, the Air National Guard frequently deployed the Corsairs on annual operational exercises. Frequent deployments were made to Howard AFB, Panama, to provide CAS training with Army units in the Canal Zone as part of Operation Cornet Co. Other Air National Guard deployments were made deployed to NATO and USAF bases in West Germany and Denmark as part of Ling-Temco-Vought exercises, along with the USAR EUR Reforger training exercises. In 1989, while deployed in Panama for a Ling-Temco-Vought deployment, Ohio Air National Guard 180th Tactical Fighter Group A-7Ds were employed during Operation Just Cause. Grenada and Lebanon Navy A-7D squadrons VA-15 and VA-87 from the US Independence provided close air support during the invasion of Grenada, codenamed Operation Urgent Fury, in October 1983. Navy A-7s also provided air support during the U.S. mission in Lebanon in 1983. An A-7 and an A-6 intruder were shot down by Syrian surface-to-air missiles on 4 December 1983. The A-7 pilot, Commander Edward Andros, managed to guide his failing Corsair over coastal waters before ejecting. He was rescued by a Lebanese fishing boat and safely returned to the U.S. Marines, Libya, on 24 March 1986. During the Gulf of Sidra dispute with Libya, Libyan air defense operators fired SAR-5 missiles at two fighter Squadron 102 F-14s from US America that were orbiting in international airspace, on a combat air patrol station. A 7S operating from Saratoga responded by firing the first AGM-88 HARM missiles used in combat. On the next day, A-6s attacked Libyan warships approaching the U.S. fleet, while A-7s again launched HARM missiles against Libyan SAM sites. In April 1986, Navy 6th Fleet A-7s from VA-72 and VA-46 aboard US America also participated in Operation El Dorado Canyon, the retaliatory attack on Libya, using HARM and Shrike anti-radar missiles to protect the Naval Strike Force from SAMs. Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. While USAF A-7s stayed home in favor of A-10s, the U.S. Navy deployed two of the last A-7D squadrons to Operation Desert Shield in August 1990 aboard US John F. Kennedy, the only carrier of 6 deployed to Desert Storm to operate the A-7. VA-46 and VA-72 made the last combat sorties of the A-7 in Operation Desert Storm, flying from the Red Sea to targets throughout Iraq. The A-7 was used both day and night to attack a wide range of heavily defended deep interdiction targets in Iraq, as well as kill boxes in Kuwait, employing a variety of weapons including precision-guided munitions such as the TV-guided Walleye glide bomb, unguided general-purpose bombs, and high-speed anti-radiation missiles. The A-7 was also used as a tanker in numerous in-flight refueling missions. Used in F-117 development. See also 1987 Indianapolis Ramada. In A-7D Corsair II crashed. The 4450th Tactical Group stationed at Nellis AFB, Nevada, had the distinction of being the last active USAF unit to operate the A-7 Corsair II. The mission of the 4450th TG was the operational development of the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, and the unit needed a surrogate aircraft for pilot training and practice. A-7Ds and A-7 kiloseconds were obtained from various active duty and Air National Guard squadrons and were assigned initially to the Provisional Unit of the 4450th Tactical Group, redesignated the 4451st Tactical Squadron in January 1983. The A-7s were used as a deception and training aircraft by the group between 1981 and 1989. It was selected because it demanded about the correct amount of pilot workload expected in the F-117A. was single-seat, and many of the F-117A pilots had F-4 or F-111 backgrounds. A-7s were used for pilot training before any F-117s had been delivered to bring all pilots to a common flight training baseline. Later, the A-7s were used to chase F-117A tests and other weapon tests at the Nellis Range. A-7 flight operations began in June 1981, concurrent with the very first YF-117A flights. The A-7s wore a unique LV tailcode and had a dark purple-black paint motif. The A-7s were based officially at Nellis Air Force Base and were maintained by the 4450th Maintenance Squadron. In addition to providing an excuse for the 4450th's existence and activities, the A-7s were also used to maintain pilot currency, particularly in the early stages when very few production F-117s were available. The pilots learned to fly chase on F-117A test and training flights, perform practice covert deployments, and practice any other purpose that could not be accomplished using F-117s, given the tight restrictions imposed on all F-117A operations. Some A-7s operated from the Tonopah Test Range Airport, about 30 miles southeast of Tonopah, Nevada, where the F-117s were being operationally tested. As a deception operation, care was taken to ensure that F-117s were never left parked outside aircraft hangars during daylight hours. However, A-7s were deliberately and routinely left outside hangars for the benefit of any orbiting Soviet spy satellites. Soviet intelligence agencies examining spy satellite imagery of the base would undoubtedly notice the A-7s parked on the Tonopah flight line, and would not be particularly interested. The intention of this deception was to convince the Soviets that Tonopah operated nothing more exciting than some obsolete A-7 Corsairs. There were approximately 20 A-7D aircraft used in developing the F-117, including several two-seat A-7K trainers. In January 1989, 3 months after the USAF admitted the F-117A existed, the A-7s were retired to AMARC and were replaced by 83-8B Talons as training aircraft, and the 4451st TS was deactivated. Training and retirement pilots quipped that the Corsair is not very fast, but it sure is slow. For dissimilar air combat training and aerial demonstrations by the Blue Angels, the Navy would choose the more nimble Douglas A-4 Skyhawk as a subsonic maneuvering platform, as some considered the A-7 to be inadequate in air combat, even though it was highly maneuverable. While some questioned its air combat capability, it was widely regarded as a highly successful attack aircraft, partly by virtue of being a stable bombing platform. Despite this, the Marine Corps also rejected the Corsair, opting instead for the VSDOLAV-8 Harrier as the light attack aircraft to replace their A-4FM Skyhawks. The Hellenic Air Force ordered 60 new A-7H aircraft in 1974 and 3 TAR-7Hs in 1980, and received 62 surplus A-7E, A-7C from the USN after the Gulf War. The last squadron that used the aircraft is the 336th. The sale of A-7s to Pakistan was not approved due to U.S. opposition to its nuclear program. F-16s began replacing the Air National Guard Corsairs beginning in the late 1980s, and the last were retired in 1993 by the ANG units at Rickenbacker, ANGB, Ohio, Des Moines International Airport, Des Moines ANGB, Iowa, Tulsa International Airport, Tulsa ANGB, Oklahoma, and Springfield-Beckley Municipal Airport, Springfield, ANGB, Ohio. U.S. Navy A-7 Corsairs began being phased out of the fleet during the mid-1980s with the arrival of the McDonnell Douglas F/A-18 Hornet. Naval Reserve A-7 squadrons transitioned concurrent with all regular Navy squadrons. The last Navy A-7s were retired by the last fleet operational squadrons in May 1991, shortly after the return from Operation Desert Storm. By the end of 1998, with the exception of some airframes used as static displays, all U.S. A-7s were disposed of by the AMARC at Davis Month and AFB, Arizona. Some of these surplus aircraft were passed to Greece, Thailand, and Portugal. The last Portuguese A-7 petaseconds were retired in 2007 after 26 years. Greece retired its A-7s in 2014. The Corsair II served for 49 years.